So today we are going to look at chapter 27, the field guide to base R. And the learning objectives of today are to get acquainted with some powerful basic tools in R, to learn subsetting and element extraction in base R, iteration functions, and also a little about plotting. So, as you already know, there are multiple frameworks in R coding. The tidyverse is only just one, and you can encounter other frameworks once you start reading R code written by others. If you are used to using the tidyverse, you will still benefit from knowing other frameworks. Also, another framework is, for example, data.table, but here we are going to look at base R, and it's 100% okay to write code that uses a mix of approaches. So you can combine them as you wish. Of course, it's your own choice. And the framework provided out of the box when you install R, it is called base R. And because it's used a lot, especially also in functions and in R packages, because this causes practically zero dependencies if you use those functions in a package. You will encounter this quite often, especially if you are going to program. And we already know some because, yes, they are also used when you use the tidyverse framework, the basic handy functions like sum, mean, and of course also library where you load and attach a R package with. So, first step about selecting. It is to select multiple elements with one bracket, and you use it to select elements that are inside vectors, lists, and data frames. But it can be a bit misleading, this title, selecting multiple elements. We call this typically subsetting, and an important thing about this is that you get the same class back. So you actually typically you shorten the vectors, lists, and data frames. In the case of data frames, you should regard this as a list of vectors, which are the columns. So you are selecting columns if you use the bracket. So this is typically called subsetting. You can also use this to reorder elements, for example, ranking elements, but also to repeat elements and actually grow the objects, because you will, put something inside the brackets to refer to the elements you want to retain in the object, and you can't repeat them. So you can also grow the objects. Selection can be done it's always using a vector inside the bracket, and the vector can contain indices to just point at the position of elements that you want to have in the returned object. And these can also be negative indices to actually say, I don't want those, so give me all the rest. So -I is to say drop element I. A vector of integers, but a logical vector can also be used, and the logical vector will be true and falses in the vector, and the result will be that the elements for which the position is true will be kept in the resulting object. Thirdly, you can also use a vector of element names on condition you are using a named vector, or that could also be a named list, actually. For example, a data frame, which is a list of columns. So these are the three ways to select elements with brackets. So let's try this. So we can do it on a vector, data frame, and the lists. For the vector of integer indices, we do things like this. So this is the vector to select. So we say we want the third position, then the second position, then the fifth position. In this case, we say, give me X except for the first and the second element. And in this case, we tell, okay, give me the third, fourth, and fifth position, because this is exactly the same as C, parentheses open, 3, 4, and 5. a logical vector, which must have the same length as x, because you want to match the true and false positions with the actual elements of the x vector. So what you could do is just add a condition onto the x. For example, the value must not be missing. So you will get a trues and falses, a logical vector with the length of x, and only the elements will be returned that are not an A. Or you could use another vector which has equal lengths, and you say, okay, I want all the elements of x that correspond to the position where the y vector is positive, which also some resembles things that you can do with filter, for example, when filtering data frames. And this we will really try out. You can use a vector of element names. So for example, this named vector, which looks like this. So if you in base R, you print a named vector, it looks like this. The vector elements are printed as usual, and the names are printed on top of them. So we provide a character vector to select these specific elements from X, and what we get back is the named vector shortened to these positions. If we could also have said melon, apple. So and repeat twice the melon, and it would also be returned twice here. This is also possible. All right, so for a list example, this is now a list of vectors. As you can see, we have first list element, named element, apple, with numeric vector of length 2, and same for banana and melon. And we say, okay, give me the elements, at least shorten the list to these named elements. And well, we just have actually kicked out the banana. We could also have used minus banana. I think you have to do, you use, maybe you need to use this C function if you want to add the minus. I'm not quite sure, but this is how it works. And for the data frame, you have actually the same, because this is just, I have just only changed the word list by the word data.frame, which could also be tibble. So it looks like this. We have 3 columns. It's just printed in another way than list, because list would print each element on above the other one and list them consecutively, while for a data frame, these are ordered as columns and rows. This is specific to the data frame class. It's print function, but it's still a list of vectors, and so you can do just the same. And because it's a data frame, it keeps this class. It is still a data frame of rows and columns, but only these 2 columns are kept. Also specific is that if you use in the selection vector, so that means inside the brackets, if you provide NA values or you generate NA values, if you are using a function inside those brackets, well, then you will get something back for those positions. It will be just missing values that you get back. So it's not dropped. While, for example, if you use filter, it will drop NA values. So what this is about, okay, for the data frame, give me back all the values, the rows where x is larger than 0. Well, if there are NA values inside, then you will not get them returned. X values are in the X. I mean, missing values in the X. So while you also have the base R function, which actually takes a logical vector and just returns the positions as integers of the truths, of the true values. And it also drops NA values. So actually, you could use the which to produce a logical vector that is used inside brackets to do subsetting, to prevent that you are having NA values returns. So this is another way, so which actually aligns better with the behavior of filter. So and that can be just something like this, which x is larger than 0. So this is quite a lot of this sort of things are discussed in the book. So I'll try to summarize them. For example, also how to do sorting in base R if you are subsetting at the same time, for example. So let's look at this vector x. The order function, it's a base R function. It returns the rank of each element of x. So 2 is the lowest number. So do I get this right? So order x. So we have 2, 3, and 1. And maybe I'm getting lost somewhere. Okay. So somehow.
Maybe
Okay, I
there's
see.
a typo.
I see.
Yeah, it's the number, the index.
It's the
not the...
yes.
Yeah.
It's the index. I was just seeing because it works like this.
Wait,
I'm always sometimes have trouble getting my head around this. Yeah, indeed. So it's the lowest number is 2, and so it's the index, though it's actually the lowest number is at position 2. So the second lowest number is at position 3 in X, and the highest number is at position 1. This is how it works. And you can also add decreasing is true, and then you get the reverse. So this actually orders the position. So you also always get positions 1, 2, the length of the vector here as indices, but they are reordered so that if you use this to subset, you will indeed sort the vector, because if you provide this as subsetting, then it will tell, okay, I take position 2. Okay, position 2 is number 2. Position 3, it is number 3. Position 1, it's number 5. And then you get this back. So perhaps a little more intuitive function, which actually does just the same, and it's also base R, is the sort function, and can also take decreasing is true. So in practice, I actually rather use that one, but just good to know that order is actually still more basic to use. All right, so even the simplest functions can be hard to see. So so a special way of subsetting also exists for data frames with single brackets. It is the actually special thing here is the comma, because up to now we have just used brackets with a simple vector inside, which is just one object inside the brackets, while here you provide two objects. You provide a rows object and a columns object, which are each on their own a single vector, which can be used for subsetting. And so, for example, well, you subset row numbers in essence with the rows, and you subset column names often using the column selector. So it resembles the select and relocate functions in the tidyverse, because you can also use it to reorder, just as in the subsetting that we saw already with single selection vectors. For example, for data frame like this with columns X, Y, and Z, so we have X vector, a numeric vector, then a character column, and then a logical column. So we can say, okay, give me the first row. This is like we would do subsetting on the rows, and this does the subsetting on the columns. So we can say with the named element in this case, because these are named column named. This is a named list actually, because it's a data frame is a named list. So we say give us the elements X and Y, so the columns and the first row, and just reduces the data frame. We get this back, but there's still more. So let's just, okay, what we can do here is give nothing, then it will return everything. So a subsetting with brackets with nothing in between, or just in this case, the rows elements, empty, it will, or missing, so then you will get everything back. So it will not do subsetting, so you get all rows back, but you are subsetting and actually reordering in this case the columns, because you first take the Z and then the Y. It's important to know if you select just one column, strange things can happen, perhaps, regarding what has been said previously. With a tibble, it is consistent with what we already saw. The class is kept, you still get a data frame, or in that case, a tibble. But in the case of a data frame, a simplification is applied. So it assumes you actually are only interested in the column as a vector and not anymore in a data frame with one column, if you select one column, no matter whether you subset rows or not. So this is what's happening here. So we select the Z column and we get just back false true as a vector. As you can see, this is no longer ordered as a data frame. But you can add drop equal false to say, hey, I don't want this to be simplified to the actual content of that list element. I want still the data frame. So we can do this like this. So you can then just subset the data frame to one column, which actually is more consistent. So I believe that is also why in tibble this is not done. This is also cool because, yeah, we are actually in these two types of syntaxes just dropping the comma and using one bracket. So while this all looks all very simple, it can sometimes be surprising or hard, depending perhaps on the knowledge that you have about this. So it is interesting to see, okay, this is what we just saw. It will be simplified to a vector. So if we add drop is false, that will not be done. But here we can see another way of drop is false, you could say. Why? Because here we just apply what we saw in the beginning, where we have said, okay, with just simple subsetting, and yeah, data frame is a list of columns. Well, okay, you can then reduce the object, but still it will retain its class. So this is respected. In this case, it's a list of vectors. You use subset the lists. You say, I want, it's a named list. I want list element Z, and it has a data frame class. When you print it, it's still printed as a data frame. So it's just list subsetting. This is also convenient. And okay, an exercise, give me columns Y and Z for the rows in this data frame where X is larger than 1. So this is, well, actually this $sign will come in a minute, but this is a vector X. We say, okay, I want to make a logical vector, so I make an expression, its condition must be larger than 1, and we select Y and Z, and then we get back what we expected. Well, there's another function to do just the same. So the result was this, and here you see same result. Is this also base R? Well, what do we see? We see no brackets. We see the subset function. We see X larger than 1. We don't see a reference. There's no X function defined, X object defined in this code. So we don't, here we have referred to the fact that this is a vector inside the data frame. So we have defined a vector here, which we apply conditioning on. But in this case, we don't do it. It actually takes the data frame as its first argument. Then second argument is a condition that's just using X. And so it knows about the fact that it's in the data frame. And here we see no quotes. So this reminds us, of course, of tidyverse ergonomics, which are used in filter and select, which also do the same. The first argument is the data frame, and then you can, you can do the, I think it's called the lazy evaluation. So it's you just need to use the names of the columns, and you don't need quotes to do this. And it does not assume, because base R normally assume, hey, I see an object X, I see an object Y, I see an object Z. Where is that object? And it would make an error. But this specific function, it doesn't. So it works. Is this base R? Yes, it is base R. So it is quite special in base R to have this function. And it already exists for a long time. It was, and it is still being used a lot because of the fact that it's so handy. You can combine filtering with selection of columns, and this function was actually a major inspiration for the syntax of dplyr. So we see much similarity. You could even say this combines filter and select in one function. So this is quite a special function, especially in base R. All right. So now let's select a single element. So what we have seen up to now, it was subsetting. You could multiply elements, etc. You could repeat elements. And if you want to extract a single element, we with double brackets or a dollar sign, if you do that, it returns the element. It's not a subset of the input object. So that's an important difference. So we actually extract one element, and we get rid of the class of the structure where that element is in. So it's always a simpler representation. And for example, if you extract an element from a vector, it will be a scalar. So it means just a single string or a single integer, single number, single logical flag like true or false. So a vector of length 1. And okay, you still have to, of course, say which element you want to extract, and you, with the double bracket, you do that with a position or with a name like this, with for example position 1, or if it's a named object exists, a named lists data frame or vector, you can use the apple name. You can use the dollar sign to add the name. So for example, $apple, and this is actually equivalent to the pull function of dplyr, which extracts based on a name, a column name of a table, extracts that column as a vector, which is not what we are use that in the dplyr verbs, which mostly just do filtering, subsetting, summarizing, which always return a table. But this is a way to extract an element of the data frame, which then is the vector. So the dollar and the double brackets can be used for this. So let's do that for a list. So our fruit list is back, and we have 3 times a numeric vector named apple, banana, and melon. So let's try the dollar sign. And as we can see, it extracts the element. So we get just the numeric vector. It's not a list anymore. Otherwise, we would see at least a title of the list elements, and indeed recognize that it is a list, not a vector. What are we doing here? I'm actually jumping back to the previous section and mixing stuff. So here we have selected with the dollar sign the melon. Here we are taking the third element of the list, but using single brackets, which means just subsetting. Okay. Then it says, I have named lists, and this is a named list with 1 element, but it is still a list. In this case, it's also the third element. We do the same. This is equivalent to saying I want to extract the melon element with the dollar sign. So you get the vector back. Here you get the vector back because you use double brackets. What's this? It's with single brackets, we use a name. Okay, so single brackets, it subsets the named lists, and we still have a named list, but with one element. So this is equivalent to this one. Still another one. All right, so this is double brackets with a name. So it's extracts a single element, it's a vector. So this is yet another way. We have actually seen now 3 different ways or ways to code this to just extract the vector. So you can use double brackets with the name, you can use double brackets with the position, or you can use the $sign like this, which is then completely equivalent to this last one. So double brackets with name. So it's just a convenient shortcut to use this. $. Is effectively extracting that single vector and returns you the vector. But it is equivalent to using the double brackets, and you don't need quotes, so it's way more convenient, this notation. That's why it's used so much. In a data frame, well, it's actually the same. So here we are extracting the melon column list element. It's equivalent. So yeah, okay, we get a vector, but often you see this, and that's because it's equivalent and easier to write up. And to conclude this section, let's have a look. We'll have a look at the book as well. But so let's imagine that the pepper object is a pepper shaker with 8 pepper packets inside. And then, well, let's have a look at the picture. I think it's somewhere here. Yeah. So here at the left, we have the pepper elements, the pepper objects, sorry, which is, yeah, we could be regarded as a list of 8 pepper packets. Then, well, here we have an example of pepper single brackets 1. What does it mean if pepper is a list? Yeah, okay, shorten the list to a list with just the first element. Okay, the elements were the pepper packets, so we still have the pepper shaker, which is the lists, and then we have only one element contained. So the list has been shortened. So this was really, I found this genius analogy. Let's go back and see. Okay, pepper 1, 2. Okay, that would be a pepper shaker containing 2 pepper packets. So the lists would have been shortened to 2 elements. Okay, pepper 1 we have seen already. Pepper 1 with double brackets. Yeah, let's extract the first element of the list. So let's see. Okay, the pepper packets. Okay, yeah, indeed. That's pepper double brackets 1. But then there's more. We could ask ourselves, okay, we have one, this is 1 pepper packet. What does this do? Does someone know?
The pepper itself, but I'm not, what the one thing that I never get about that example is when it's the mountain of pepper or just 1 grain of pepper. That's the one thing that sort of throws me out of a loop, because I try to think that one of those packets of pepper, let's say it's a data frame or it's a vector. And then inside that vector, there are grains of pepper. So each one of those grains of pepper would be a scalar. So that's when I start getting confused, because I think Hadley put that on Twitter. So he gave the example of a mountain of pepper. So anyway, that's when I get confused with that example. But I guess that's but that would be the pepper, I think. What's contained inside one packet of pepper, I guess.
Yeah, you could indeed discuss about what actually is the analogy between this, so the pepper packets and an R structure.
Yeah, we need to know the class of the pepper packet.
Yeah, we need to know the class.
Check the method.
Yes, we need to know the class. I was thinking that this was again a list, because then this makes a little more sense, this distinction. So, and then you would say, okay, this is a list. Yeah, but of what? So maybe this is, I think this is in this reasoning, then you have a list of pepper grains again. So the one pepper packet is a list of pepper grains, and then you would say, okay, this is a pepper packet with just one pepper grain, because you are shortening it with single brackets to yeah, just the pepper still containing still maintaining the list class of the pepper packet, but just shortening it because there were so many pepper grains in it. So you have just one pepper packet with one pepper grain, and then this, of course, extracts the pepper grain, the single pepper grain. Yeah, that would be to me that would make sense. If it were a vector, then here you already have the pepper grain, I think, right?
I mean, that's so pepper one is pepper double bracket one is the packet.
Yes.
And pepper bracket one single one, again, it kind of depends on the class. I would take that is the still the same thing, because you aren't going inside of it.
Yeah,
So,
but if it's but that's the
because pepper double bracket one is a one element vector of pepper packets. And so you're still going to have just a one element vector of pepper packets.
Yeah. That it depends. I think it depends. If this is a list of a vector, yes.
Yeah.
Then you are right, I think, because then you are still just shortening a list, which was already a list of one element.
Right.
If that element is a vector, but if this just is a vector that we don't know, then we are subsetting in the vector.
Yeah, that's the one thing I don't like about that example, because it could be a matrix.
Okay.
Right? All the peppers are the same thing, so it's a matrix. Or is it a data frame, or is it a vector?
Yeah.
With that much pepper, I
The only
think
reason.
it's me sneezing right now.
Let's see.
That's
I'm trying to. So yeah. It does depend on what the inside thing is. I'm trying to put together a real quick example of my thought process here. Let's see.
Yeah.
We can do that, and then.
Sorry, but it's worth thinking about it, because if you were using that for teaching or in a class, students are going to get confused if we don't clarify that, which is what happened to me.
You have to clarify as a class, and then we are really back into the chapter of hierarchical data, aren't we? So let's also express it as a JSON. All right. So
yeah.
Yeah, because inside one pepper grain, I have looked it up. There's one seed actually.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it depends. It does depend what it is. So let me do
yes.
Mm-hmm.
It will depend.
So let's see. Oops. So
okay. I'm waiting.
I'm not getting the structure that I want to show you in order to do this. So like I'm trying to do, like, if you just do. No, I'm not there yet. It totally depends what the packet is. Is basically, if you type in your console, is it a list? Is it a like, if I just take this out, let's see. It doesn't help that I'm not like actually showing you. But yeah, like if it's a list of a vector, a list that has a single vector in it, then you need another pair of brackets.
Yeah, actually that's
a grain.
Yes.
Anyway, so it's it'll be interesting, or it's interesting to get in his head. I remember when he posted that picture on Twitter, like I think it was like the book says that he was like at a hotel for a conference or something and thought it was hilarious. But I didn't understand that it was a random thing he found. I thought he was trying to use it as an example, and I'm like, but that's insane. that's not a thing. You know, like people don't use pepper that way. It's like, oh yeah, he agrees that it's an insane thing. But it was nice to have a container of containers because, you know, conceptually that works really well.
Yeah. So
But
this is
I like that he was thinking about that, because the same thing can be like a stack of, you're eating pancakes, a stack of pancakes, and it's like the pancake, you have like things inside or something. So yeah, I mean, anything can turn into an example. But let's just clarify what each thing is so that we understand.
Yeah.
That's a list of matrices. That's a list of data
Yeah.
frames or what. But
absolutely.
but I like it. Maybe we should ask him on Mastodon, because he's no longer on X, right? He's now only on
Yeah.
on
And
Mastodon.
he's not on Mastodon that much,
Oh well, that's true.
but yeah, I mean, it wouldn't hurt. He showed me a photo that he saw. I think it was it was while he was visiting New Zealand recently, and there was a place called like the Cheese Shop, and they had a little, like, they had their sign, and then below it said parentheses, not just cheese. And because clearly they had to keep telling people, oh, we're not just a cheese shop, like we're called the Cheese Shop. And it was perfect because it was like right when we were changing from the R4DS online learning community to the data science learning community. And he's like, you know, here you go. So I need to get that photo from him. That's exactly why we changed our name. R4DS, not just R4DS.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
All right. So let's continue with another set of base R functions. And so these are apply functions. So we can, yeah, this is already for iteration. So, and well, let's just look at the basic apply function, which is actually not focused on that much in the book. So also matrices aren't really, but a matrix, you could compare it very much to a vector, to a single vector, but in a two-dimensional way. So you can really compose a matrix in a very simple way like this. So you provide a vector and you tell it, well, I want to arrange it with that many columns or rows or etc. etc. It has several arguments to structure this, but then it says, okay, and by default it will use the columns to map the vector in. So you see the vector mapped like this over these three columns. And as you can already see, the row and the column numbers, they are actually provided as indices, much in the same way as we saw subsetting approaches for data frames with the rows, columns, which is indeed useful also in subsetting matrices. But contrary to data frame, a matrix can only contain one data type, of course, because you derive it from one vector. So this is something important. And why are we telling this? It is because the simple apply function, it is really designed to work on a matrix, So it summarizes the matrices over their margins. So the margins, it's either the rows or the columns. So what it takes is a matrix, a margin, which is 1 or 2, 1 or the rows, and it applies a function over the rows. So we had 8 rows. So for each row, this is the sum of the values. These are the row sums. So 1 plus 9 plus 17 is 27, for example. But you can also take the second margin, the columns, and then you get the sums of each column. So there are 3 columns, so you get a vector of length 3. And this is matrix algebra, which is often used in statistical methods, often below under the hood, but it is actually used a lot in packages and in functions. So it's good to know about this, even though when working with data frames, you won't be using it. It's really used in matrices. But it's also the base name for several other functions, like, and this one you will encounter more often, lapply, for example. So it takes a lists and a function as arguments, and it's behaves in much the same way as the map function from the per package. So it applies its function to each element of the list, and the result will be returned as a list of the same length. So you get a list of, for example, 7 elements, you get back a list of 7 elements, but the function has been applied on each element, and that can be anything, because lists are so versatile. So it can be about a model object onto which you apply something. So this is quite powerful because you are working with lists, so it's extremely flexible. There are some specific variations. So the as-apply, especially and the v-apply, they try to simplify the results. For example, if you are actually doing aggregations on the elements, you may go from a vector element to a scalar, for example, and then as-apply will return overall a vector of scalars because it's no longer needed to keep the lists class. So that's what as-apply will do. v-apply does a similar thing. We'll see that in a minute. And these are, for this, there also exists in the per package the map vec function, which hasn't been discussed before, I believe. And then the tapply function, it's still something else. It's to generate summaries for groups. So it resembles the combination of group by and summarize. So let's look at some examples of those simplifications. So we have this data frame, 4 columns, and we have 2 rows. Some are numeric, some are character columns, and we can apply a function. In this case, it's a function that returns a logical. The function is .numeric. So, okay, so what are we actually doing? So we have a list of columns, and we want for each column, which is an element of the list, we want to know whether it is numeric. So what as-apply will do, it will not return what lapply would do. Perhaps I should have added lapply as well. Lapply would give you back a list of 4 logical values. So it would give back a list true, true, false, false. So a list of 4 elements, named elements also, because it's we start with a named list. But here we don't have a named list, we have a named vector. So that's the reason we can see it right away, because it's printed in that way. You can of course also print the class more explicitly, but so you get back a vector because it sees, okay, a list with elements where each element is only a logical flag. Well, I can simplify that to just a vector of 4 elements instead of a list of 4 elements. The v-apply function, well, here we see just the same result, but it takes control of what you expect of the result of the function on one element, which must be, you actually require it to be logical of length 1. The result of this function applied to one element of this list, indeed. So, okay, it works, and you are much advised to use this function rather than the as-apply function when you're writing functions, especially in packages which are then used more often, because this is safer, because you will get an error if it is not what you would expect. So let's try this and require something else. Let's try, and we say, well, I expect a character. Of course, this is nonsense, because you will never have this here, because this is a function that always produces logical values. But just suppose that we are doing something, or we are having input from which, when applying this function, we expect a character, and then it will error. It says, well, this is not okay because you wanted to have characters, but yeah, I get logicals. So that's a way to protect against unexpected results. All right, and then a example for tapply. So it takes vectors and it uses it. Well, summarize the price in this case. So it summarizes the first grouped by the second. So that's what we see here. We get for the fair cuts this mean value because we provide that as the last or the third argument. It is the function name again, which is used to summarize values within this price vector. So this is a way to summarize a vector by groups, and you get back a named vector. So this is quite different what we are used to, of course, in the context of a data frame, where you are using the group labels in one column or one variable of the data frame and getting the results in another column, for example. So here, the ability of vectors to have names for each element, that is used here to actually provide names to the resulting values. So you get a named vector. So if you want to convert this, for example, to some other structure like a data frame, you will need to use another base R function like names, which will extract the names of this vector as a character vector. Then you could combine this into a data frame, for example. All right, so then another section is about for loops. So this is really iterating, and it is similar to the walk function in PER, because you are quite often using the for loop to get side effects. For example, you produce graphs, or you produce model objects, or you do something, or maybe you write a file, or you read a file. It can be various things that happen rather than you will do it to really store things. That's what a walk at least is about. So it's more about side effects. So you do something for each element in something. This does not have to be, I think, a vector, but in this case it's often used within a vector context. You really must also define this name. It could also often use an index I. You can often see that, for example, I in vector whatever, and then it does something with that element, or at least for that value. It does not even have to use element, but this name can be used inside this function. That is what the for loop is doing. So that's possible. And then does it start with the first one, then the second one, and so on up to the last one. So this is repeated for each element in turn. So this is really important to understand. This for loop is really looping over the elements as the vector for each element. This thing is done once, and it can use the value, but it doesn't have to use. It can use the value of that element inside because it can refer that name. But well, you can use it to store, to save outputs in some objects, and how should we do that? To save output of the loops in one list, in one common list or vector. We actually, what we would like is that after the whole for loop, we want to get something that already combines all results. So, for example, each element of the vector that results would be the result of one single loop, or for a list. What you have to do, well, you don't have to do, but you're really advised to do this, is before you start the for loop, reallocate memory to your resulting vector or your resulting data frame or lists, and then fill in those values using the for loop. So you first set up the structure with a certain length, with still empty values, and then in the for loop you say, okay, put this value in position 1. Then in the second for loop you say put this value in position 2, and so on. And this is because the often used approach to just start with something of length 0 perhaps, and then with each loop cycle growing the object, it is much slower, because then that memory allocation has to be done again and again for the resulting objects, while this was already in place in the case of, it was already the case when you have pre-allocated memory. So let's look at an example. So this is using code from the book. We have the path to Excel files, and this is just a vector of strings which represent the file paths to Excel files. And what we actually will do is read those contents, and store the results as data frames or tables. What we actually want to obtain at last is a giant table with all contents of the different Excel file under each other. So it will be concatenated by rows. And then, so because we don't want to grow this object, we say, okay, that the object will be called files, for example, or at least what we first want to create is a list to be clear. So this is a list, and we can create an empty list using the vector function. It's a bit confusing, but we can make a list with the vector function. The vector function takes the class and a length. So the length is the length of path. So it is a vector of 12 paths, in fact. So we get an empty list of size 12 empty elements. So this will be null elements, as you would see if you print files. So the sec along, what it does, it is creating an integer vector from 1 to 12. And as John rightly says in the chat, you can, or Gabby, sorry, says in the chat, indeed, one column length paths would produce the same results, indeed. But sec along, I think it's considered safer.
Yeah, and the thing I posted is why you should use sequence along. Because if the length is 0, 1 to 0 is 1 then 0, which is way not what you intend. It's going to be something, and it can produce all kinds of crazy things. Also, if you do something, length isn't going to do it, but there will be times where you'll end up with a negative number in the length of your sequence, and no, you don't want to. The length wouldn't be negative, but if you do some other formula there, you might end up with going to a negative number when you really meant to do something like sequence along.
Yeah, exactly.
So
we could just try. Right, let's do this in a console. We're in base R, right? So let's just use a console. And, let's see what we get. So yeah, perhaps I'll do this again, row by row. So we have X, which is just an empty list. And well, let's perhaps do this first. Then we can see it has a length 0. So if we do this, as John already says, we get a result 1, 0, and then if we do sec along X, we get an integer of length 0, which is actually because it's empty. So that makes sense.
Yep.
All right.
Same if you said X is null, which is something that can happen easily if that value doesn't exist in your data set or something. You can get a null, and then the length of null is 0. So,
okay, so if you would, you mean if you do this, right? So for example, this,
No, just x gets null.
Ah,
Just
like
as in
this?
x doesn't exist, basically. Yep.
Ah, yeah, right.
And
X,
then if you do
yeah,
one,
okay.
or length of x is 0.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So you would still get the 1, 0, which
Yeah.
depending, usually what will happen there is then you end up with two values where you should have 0 values. And it's like being off by 2 feels so weird. Like, okay, I can see having 1 value because it made one for the empty one, but what's going on? And
Yeah,
those can be really hard to debug. Of what happened there?
Yeah. Let's just have a look at this one, right?
Yep.
I think it's also useful to just try out. Let's take length of 3. So we just get 3 elements which are null. So these are really, this is a list which we want to populate in the for loop with still simple as empty elements. But if we want to know the length, well, this will still be 3, of course. So this is indeed a list. It has a length, but its elements are null, so empty. All right, so where were we? We were here. So for I in 1 to 12, essentially. So I will take on value 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. So if we use it in the for loop, these are the index values that we get. So we say, okay, the files lists position 3 or 4 or whatever, where we are in the loop, takes the contents from the Excel file number this, because we had, oh yes, that's also interesting, the paths object is also a list. It's not just a vector, it appears to be a list, and I guess, and this extracts at least the file string, so of the file path, and that I meant. So the file path number 3, for example, if I is 3, and then you can provide it to read Excel. So this is what we then get out is a list which is populated with, in this case, 12 tables, because each element is the table coming from one Excel file. And then we can, we could use bind rows, for example, and provide in the tidyverse, but you could also do, you have the rbind function in base R to combine data frames by row. And you can use, in this case, the do.call function. What the do.call function is actually allowing to program the arguments of its first argument. So the first argument is a function, so it takes a function, and its second argument is the arguments it will provide to the function. So you can provide it as a list. I think it must be provided as a list, so you can calculate, you can use this in programming, the do.call function, to actually program values of arguments in a powerful way. And in this case, we provide the files lists. So indeed, the rbind function accepts multiple data frames, which are then binded by row. And then in this case, it will just put together these different tables. So then the result works. So this is a way to do all this in base R. So finally, some plotting functions. I've tried to add the actual code also, which is hidden in the book, to make it possible to put these two plots side by side. So, but essentially, the book is about the hist and about the plot function. These are also very versatile functions with many arguments. I'm quite unfamiliar with them, I must say, because I'm mostly using ggplots from the tidyverse, but it is handy to, if you are having a vector and you want just very quickly see what is the distribution. Well, doing this, it's still way more fast than typing ggplot plus an AES, etc., geom, this or that. So it's simpler, it's really a shortcut, and so it can be handy. But then, if you want to tweak it, either you already know all these different argument names, but they're not that very expressive, in my opinion. They're very short, typically. So I always have to search in documentation, which is quite extensive, which means that you can do a lot with these functions, especially the plot function. So what this one does, it's by default, in this case, it makes a scatter plots. But I must say I've always been charmed by the layout of these functions. They are quite neat and quite nice, I think. They are more or less ready to put in I would say, in a scientific paper. Black and white, but they are quite nicely worked out. So, but of course, still no labels, etc., as you can see, because you are just using the object names here. And this thing, it's about setting parameters for these functions. This mfrow, it actually accepts what this says. It's saying, okay, I will produce multiple plots, and I want them to show you. I want you to show them in one row and two columns. So this is one row and two columns of plots. You could also say, okay, I will actually plot 4 graphs, and I want 2 rows and 2 columns. I want to organize them as 2 rows and 2 columns, and you can put 2 here. And just as with the options function, which is also base R, you can just put this would be enough, but you can use Alt-par. I actually forgot here, but it returns the previous settings. So one annoying thing, if you are just doing this, and then you are plotting a third one, you will just see something at the left and not using your full screen. So you have then to set it back to 1, 1, which was the previous one. But you can also store this. It will be the 1, 1, and then after this, put par, parentheses open, Alt-par, parentheses closed. So something like that. That's how you can play with combining multiple plots. So that's all for this chapter. So if there are further questions, shoot.
Nope, I think that's it. We're gonna do a short break. I think 2 weeks,